to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. And we're like, see, this says we're debtors. We are debtors to the flesh, but not to the flesh in such a way that we have to live according to the flesh. So we owe the flesh something, but not to be fleshly. Because if we do, we'll die. And then we're like, what am I in debt to, and why am I not supposed to follow up with that? So it's just, this is a passage that for many years troubled me. One of the things we don't do here, a great school that you can follow up, is to do word by heart. You spend a whole month in the gospel, and you will walk away with the gospel memorized. Not a whole 3 months. The 3 months, the whole quarter. And you can present it orally. So you don't memorize it, you internalize it, and in the process you end up, it gets. So years ago, I didn't memorize the whole book of Romans, but I memorized the first 12 chapters. And just that process of just going over and over again and just thinking and rethinking and saying and re-saying, and you start connecting the dots, because this word you remember, oh, that was in chapter 3, it's also in chapter 8, and this, you just start connecting. So the more time you spend, on the side, maybe memorize the Sermon on the Mount during that SBS, just for fun, just to get closer to God a little bit, or whatever. But there are other disciplines besides study that are really important as we engage deeper and deeper with the Word. So when I say this concerned me, this is years ago, I was like, I really don't get this. I'm just talking about it. So the question was like, what does flesh mean in this context? So I want to walk you through a process that I've been through that can illustrate, hopefully, answers for this passage in Romans, but also that you can take for any passage anywhere. So first of all, I looked up the word and found the Greek, looked up the word flesh, found that the Greek was sarx, looked in the Strong's Concordance. Back in the day, that was on paper, but you guys, it's so easy digitally now. And I found you can search it, and 24 times that Paul uses sarx in Romans. So it's a significantly used word, okay? And so right here I have all the references where this is done. You can take notes, but you're going to have these copies, so you don't have to scribble all of these down, okay? So it's in chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, it skips us 5, but 6, 7, 8, 9 skips us 10, and 11, and 13. So it's like right throughout. But you can tell that chapter 8 in the verses 12 and 13 where I started with, this is the place where he talks about sarx, flesh, more than any place else. So I looked at the ESV because it's, you're using it because it's more literal. But there are 4 times, all these times that are still up there, it's translated flesh. But 4 times ESV does not translate it as flesh because it doesn't make sense in English to have flesh. Okay? So in 228 they translate sarx as physical, and 320 they translate it as human. In 619 they translate it as natural limitations, and in 1114 they translate it as Jews. Okay, so this is the same word. Okay, if you go to other translations, there's even more variants. So ESV is one of the more literal ones. So NASB and ESV would be in that category. But it's important to understand what I love the way Trainer talks about it. He talks about observing terms. A term is a word in context. Because if you don't know the context of the word, you can give it the wrong definition, the wrong meaning. But it's the context which defines it. And so I wish it helped me out a little bit on in verses 12 and 13 of chapter 8, because I'm still not understanding flesh there, what it means. But they were clearly like, no one will get it in these four instances if we just translate it as flesh. Well, I think there are two other passages that are difficult. So in order to understand 12 and 13 of chapter 8, I'm going to go through and look at all of the instances and try to determine from the context, not by looking up at a dictionary, because the dictionary will have 17 different definitions, find out how is Paul using it, okay? So that's what I'm going to work on. So I'm going to add also verses chapter 1, 3, and 7, 5 are important for me. So, now look at this. So, let's just do this. Paul, a servant of Christ Jesus, called to be an apostle, set apart for the gospel of God, which he promised beforehand through his prophets of the Holy Scriptures concerning his son, who was descended from David according to the Sarks. Okay, so this is his introduction. I told you this is really important. Pay a lot of attention to the words in the introduction and the conclusion, and you'll add it. So it's still part of the first sentence. The sentence goes on, it says, and the Son of God bear the power of the resurrection, etc. Okay? So it's halfway through his first sentence that he gets to the word sarks. So when it says he was descended from David according to the sarks, how would you translate that word? Okay, I'm going to do this. Go for it, Mariah.
I would say bodily form.
What?
Like according to bodily form.
The bodily form, okay. Bloodline. A couple more suggestions. Is that good? Genealogy. Is that what you said?
Yeah. That's one thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, like ancestry.
Ancestry. Okay, so this is about physical descent, right? So it's dad, grandfather, great-grandfather, great-great-great-great-grandfather was David. So that's clear. It's physical descent. It's natural genealogy. Those are my words, similar to some of the words you gave. ESV just says flesh. And they think people will figure it out. Okay? So we don't have to give the equivalent in English. People understand. It's just physical descent. Okay? So that's one way, that's the first way Paul uses this word. Okay? So we're going to find several different ways he uses it. So when we get to the difficult passages, we're going to figure out like which of these various uses of this word the same author in the same book is intending here. Are you with me?
Yes.
See why we're going through this process? So we're just doing this. So the next one is, for no one is a Jew who is merely one outwardly, nor is circumcision outward and in the sarks. So what would you say would be the interpretation for that word there? Remember I said sometimes we do things, we like to use other language when things get uncomfortable. But where is circumcision done? What?
Foreskin.
The foreskin. Okay? Good, okay, so, and in the male sexual organ, okay? So you can all relax now. Okay, you want to add something else?
So, in this case, sarx is used as the word physical?
Yes, when I wanting you to not go to ESV first. I want you to think first on your own. So here, where circumcision is done is on the foreskin of the male penis. Okay. So that's how Paul uses it in this passage. So already we can there are a variety of meanings, right? So it's the male sexual organ, and ESV very gently says physically. The circumcision is something physically that like a knife to your body. Ouch. Good when they do it on your 8th day, you can't complain too much. Okay? And remember, this is a big issue because it's the Jew-Gentile. What sets the Jews apart from the Gentiles is the circumcision. That's one of the trademark things. Okay, so this is important to them. It's not marginal to the discussion. In fact, in chapter 3, he talks about circumcision and uncircumcision as synonyms for Jew and Gentile. Okay? So, Now we're at chapter 3, verse 20. For by works of the law, no sarx will be justified in his sight, since through the law comes knowledge of sin. What does sarx mean here? For by works of the law, no sarx will be justified in his sight.
Like you're human.
What?
Human.
Human.
Oh,
What? Somebody else said something else?
yeah, I said human as well.
Human? Yes, a person. Nobody. Not a single person. No human being, right? No one's going to be justified by works of the law. So it just means a person, a human being. ESV says human. Okay? So this is one of the places that you're like, by works of the law, no flesh. It's just like, it's clearly human, right? So let's put it in English in the simplest way to understand, because it's different than Greek. So in 6:19, it says, I am speaking in human terms because of your sarx. Again, just don't look at your ASV, just look at this text here. For just as you once presented your members as slaves to impurity and to lawlessness, leading to more lawlessness, so now present your members as slaves to righteousness, leading to sanctification. What is sarx here? Your mind, and because of your brain. I'm speaking in human terms, okay? Your mind, your brain, your thinking. What else could it be? Yeah,
Like your ability.
your abilities. Yeah, I'm having to use this kind of language because these are the abilities you have, and I can't do it any other way. I'm just recognizing what your abilities are or aren't, right? So that's a good term. Yeah?
Maybe ignorance.
Yeah, perhaps because of your ignorance, limited abilities.
Your understanding.
Okay, that's like ignorance on the flip side of the same coin. Yeah.
Like your nature or your state.
Okay, your nature, your state,
Use mortality.
mortality because you're
I'm speaking in human terms because of your mortality.
because you're mortal.
Yeah.
You're okay. You're gonna be out of here before long, something like that. Well, ESV said human limitations. ESV. I thought limited perspectives, inability to understand. So, understanding, talents or abilities. Those are all terms that you use. So, he said, I can't just. I'm having to find language that'll make sense to you. And so your sarx is something that is somewhat limited. Okay? Somewhat limited. Okay, so we're getting quite a bunch of definitions just from this book. Okay? Let's look for another one. In chapter 7, verses 5 to 6. For while we were living in the sarx, our sinful passions, aroused by the law, were at work in our members to bear fruit for death. But now we are released from the law, having died to that which held us captives, so that we serve in the new way of the Spirit and not in the old way of the written code. The sarx means body.
Desires.
Desires. What else? Take a look. Consider, yeah.
Flesh. While we were living in the flesh.
Yes, the word is flesh.
Yeah.
Yes, so the question is, what does flesh mean?
Oh, okay. I think
Sarx
desire.
literally is flesh. Every one of these is the word flesh. We're
Desire.
just trying to figure out what does flesh in Greek mean in equivalent in English. So desires would be a good response, okay?
Fallen nature.
Fallen nature.
Dang.
Very nicely reformed. Thank you. Okay? Any other goes at this? Well, this is one that if you observe, Paul realizes that he's using this word in various different ways, and he helps us understand. He defines it. Our sarx is our sinful passions. He defines it. It's right there. Okay? That's how he's using it in that instance. That's what he's meaning. So some of you mentioned desires. ESV just keeps it as flesh. But Paul says that when you do something with two commas like that, it's like this is repeating in another as a definition. Okay, so thank you, Paul. You didn't define it any place else, but you defined it here. But you've used it very differently in other places. No wonder you had to define it here, because like, what are you talking about? Are you talking about genealogical descent? Are you talking about a male sexual organ? What are you talking about here? Right? Because you used this word in all of those ways up to this point. Okay, so I'm going to do one more. Chapter 11, verses 13 to 14. Now I am speaking to you Gentiles, inasmuch then as I am an apostle to the Gentiles, I magnify my ministry in order somehow to make my fellow sarks jealous, and thus save some of them. My fellow sarks.
Families.
Who is his fellow sarks? Jews. Paul's ethnic people. Those are the Jewish people. ESV just says Jews. So what sarks mean? It goes all the way from foreskin to Jews. With human beings and genealogies and sinful passions thrown in the middle. Okay? Okay? So, are you following me? This is, the text requires these varieties of meanings. It doesn't make sense to put Jews in any of the other ones that we read. Nor does it make sense to put in the foreskin into any of the other ones we read, right? So each one has a unique, and the context gives the meaning to that word flesh. Right? So our question is, we're having trouble with chapter 8. Which is it? So as I read through all of them, we could continue doing this, but these are 6 definitions distinct definitions that I see how Paul uses it in Romans. So my question now is, what is the meaning, the question I began with, of sarx, of the word flesh? What does it mean? We know it's the word for flesh, but how is he using it in Romans 8? 3 through 13. You know, that was the chapter with all those verses. So, did he mean physical descent? Did he mean the male sexual organ? Did he mean all persons, or human limitations, or sinful passions, or the Jewish people? Okay, those are the 6 definitions we've come up with so far. So, you know what you do? You read the passage, and you insert these definitions one by one into the passage, and you go like, which makes most sense? Okay? It's kind of like a trial by error. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to read this passage 6 times, and we're going to read all with each one of these 6 definitions, and you can tell me, you just think it through, which is the best definition. Now, remember, you've already got some of the context of the book, and let's go through it, okay? So let's start off with sarx meaning physical descent. So I'll just read out loud, okay? For what the law was powerless to do because it was weakened by the physical descent, God did by sending his own son in the likeness of sinful physical descent to be a sin offering. And so he condemned sin in the physical descent, in order that the righteous requirement of the law might be fully met in us who do not live according to the physical descent, but according to the Spirit. Those who live according to the physical descent have their mind set on what the physical descent desires. But those who live in accordance with the Spirit have their mind set on what the Spirit desires. The mind governed by the physical descent is death, but the mind governed by the Spirit is life and peace. The mind governed by the physical descent is hostile to God. It does not submit to God's law, nor can it do so. Those who are in the physical descent cannot please God. You, however, are not in the physical descent, and you are in the Spirit, if indeed the Spirit of God lives in you. And if anyone does not have the Spirit of God, they do not belong to Christ. But if Christ is in you, then even though your body is subject to death because of sin, the Spirit gives life because of righteousness. And if the Spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead is living in you, he who raised Christ from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies because of his Spirit who lives in you. Therefore, brothers and sisters, we have an obligation, but it is not to physical descent, to live according to the physical descent. For if we live according to the physical descent, you will die. but by the Spirit you put to death the misdeeds of the body, you will live. Do you think that works?
No.
No. Yes.
We saw in the rest of the book that he used different meanings for flesh in different places. Would it be realistic to think that he would do that here, or would he use the same definition for flesh through this entire portion of
That's a
Scripture?
great question. In all of those different places, there were the unique use of that word in that half a chapter. Okay? So this is an ongoing one line of an argument. So it could be that more than one definition is being used here. That's a really great question. But I'm presuming that there's at least one overarching one that applies either to most of them or to all of them. Okay? But that's an excellent question. Well done. Bravo. I think we can discard this one.
Yes.
Right? Okay, so again, let me just rehearse. We're going to do this 5 more times. Okay? So what we're going to do is, this is how you learn, guys. And instead of just arriving and say, well, I think, it really doesn't matter what you think. It doesn't matter what I think. What we're trying to discover is, what did Paul think?
That's right.
Okay? And so we're trying to get inside of his head. And so it's a little laborious, but we go through this process, and then we've eliminated several possibilities, and then it's a lot easier to go like, oh, I get it. And what I usually find when I do this, the Spirit of God, through the authors of the Scriptures, are thinking differently than I think. And it requires a change in my mindset. So I don't want to start with my thinking. I want to try to get into their thinking. So all of these say flesh, say sarx, and sometimes it makes sense. We don't need it because we can kind of figure it out with that. So ESV has sarx, has flesh for all of these instances. And most translations just have flesh because it's complicated. But this is the heart. This is This is one of the culminating moments in the book. Okay, this is chapter 8. They've got several climaxes, but the first one is here. Okay. So let's try the next word, the male sexual organ. This is going to be a little bit awkward, but I'm going to read it anyway. I think I might be able to figure out how you're going to vote, up or down on this one. He used it this way, so we need to just try it out. For what the law was powerless to do because it was weakened by the male sexual organ, God did by sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful male sexual organs to be a sin offering. And so he condemned sin in the male sexual organ, in order that the righteous requirement of the law might be fully met in us who do not live according to the male sexual organ, but according to the Spirit. Those who live according to the male sexual organ have their mind set on what the male sexual organ desires. But those who live in accordance with the Spirit have their mind set on what the Spirit desires. The mind governed by the male sexual organ is death, but the mind governed by the Spirit is life and peace. So some of these might actually apply, okay? The mind governed by the male sexual organ is hostile to God. It does not submit to God's law, nor can it do so. Those who are in the male sexual organ cannot please God. You, however, are not in the male sexual organ, but are in the Spirit, if indeed the Spirit of God lives in you. And if anyone does not have the Spirit of God, they do not belong to Christ. But if Christ is in you, then even though your body is subject to death because of sin, the Spirit gives life because of righteousness. And if the Spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead is living in you, he who raised Christ from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies because of his Spirit who lives in you. Therefore, brothers and sisters, we have an obligation, but it is not to the male sexual organ, to live according to the male sexual organ. For if you live according to the male sexual organ, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the misdeeds of the body, you will live. Is this an appropriate translation? So let me see a thumbs up or thumbs down. I just want to...
There's one.
A couple of them now. Yeah. Okay, let's go on. We won't belabor that point. We saw that sarx was used as all persons, just as human beings, right? So, let's try this again. For what the law was powerless to do because it was weakened by all persons. God did by sending his own Son in the likeness of all sinful persons to be a sin offering. And so he condemned sin in all persons, in order that the righteous requirement of the law might be fully met in us, who do not live according to all persons, but according to the Spirit. Those who live according to all persons have their mind set on what all persons desire. But those who live in accordance with the Spirit have their mind set on what the Spirit desires. The mind governed by all persons is death. The mind governed by the Spirit is life and peace. The mind governed by all persons is hostile to God. It does not submit to God's law, nor can it do so. Those who are in all persons cannot please God. You, however, are not all persons, but you are in the Spirit. If indeed the Spirit of God lives in you, and if anyone does not have the Spirit of God, they do not belong to Christ. But if Christ is in you, then even though your body is subject to death because of sin, the Spirit gives life because of righteousness. And if the Spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead is living in you, he who raised Christ from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies because of his Spirit who lives in you. Therefore, brothers and sisters, we have an obligation, but it's not to all persons to live according to all persons. For if you live according to all persons, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the misdeeds of the body, you will live. What do you think? I've got some people going like this. I've got some people with an up and some with a down. Some like in between. Come on, everybody vote something. Give us a question mark. Okay, so there are a lot of like maybes. There's some downs and some ups. And of course, we need to get through all 6 of them before we make a final decision. So there might be a couple of phrases on the last one that fit. Some of the guys were going like, yeah, that might have fit. Not all of them, but maybe a couple. So you were right like that. And here, quite a few said, well, maybe this is it. So just keep that in mind. We don't want to draw conclusions prematurely. Let's go on. We've done 3. We've got number 4 and 5 and 6 to go. So the one was human limitations. You gotta drink of water. Okay, for what the law was powerless to do because it was weakened by human limitations, God did by sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful human limitations to be a sin offering. And so he condemned sin in human limitations, in order that the righteous requirement of the law might be fully met in us, who do not live according to human limitations, but according to the Spirit. Those who live according to human limitations have the mindset of what human limitations desire. But those who live in accordance with the Spirit... Oh, sorry, that's what I was trying to avoid doing. I'm so sorry. Is your Bible okay? Sorry, I was trying to not do it on my computer and did it almost on yours. Human limitations. I blame my sarks for this. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for helping. Pause. If you're listening on this audio, at some future time, we just had a calamity. I threw a bottle of water at one of the students. They're alive. The computer's alive, but we have to pause for just a moment.
You wanted to make sure you're not live.
I was just trying to demonstrate my own human limitations. I cannot hold a microphone with one hand and open and close the bottle lid in the other hand.
Hey David, do you want one of us to read to give your voice a break?
I'm okay.
Okay.
You might get tired of my voice, but I'm trying to give the same similar inflections, okay?
Consistency.
That's very kind of you. Are you tired of listening to my voice?
No, not at all.
I might get tired of listening to my voice. Well done, team. Let's give them a round of applause. Okay. Those who live according to human limitations have their mindset on what human limitations desire. For those who live in accordance with the Spirit have their mindset on what the Spirit desires. The mind governed by human limitations is death. But the mind governed by the Spirit is life and peace. The mind governed by human limitations is hostile to God. It does not submit to God's law, nor can it do so. Those who are in human limitations cannot please God. You, however, are not in the human limitations, but you are in the Spirit, if indeed the Spirit of God lives in you. And if anyone does not have the Spirit of Christ, they do not belong to Christ. But if Christ is in you, then even though your body is subject to death because of sin, the Spirit gives life because of righteousness. And if the Spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead is living in you, he who raised Christ from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies because of his Spirit who lives in you. Therefore, brothers and sisters, we have an obligation. We have an obligation, but it's not to the human limitations, to live according to the human limitations. For if we live according to the human limitations, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the misdeeds of the body, you will live. So, I have two very energetic, one thumb down and one thumbs up, and several sideways. Come on, I want to see everybody at least attempt. It's inductive. You're thinking for yourself, not glancing around as the crowd's like. Yeah. Yeah. Differences. So we're kind of on a variety of thoughts there. We'll go to sinful passions. You know this is 728. It said this. So this is not too far after that. For what law was powerless to do because it was weakened by the sinful passions, God did by sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful passions, to be a sin offering. And so he condemned sin in the sinful passions, in order that the righteous requirement of the law might be fully met in us who do not live according to the sinful passions, but according to the Spirit. Those who live according to sinful passions have their mind set on what the sinful passions desires. But those who live in accordance with the Spirit have their mind set on what the Spirit desires. And the mind governed by the sinful passions is death, but the mind governed by the Spirit is life and peace. The mind governed by the sinful passions is hostile to God. It does not submit to God's law, nor can it do so, for those who are in sinful passions cannot please God. You, however, are not in the sinful passions, but are in the Spirit, if indeed the Spirit of God lives in you. And if anyone does not have the Spirit of Christ, they do not belong to Christ. But if Christ is in you, then even though your body is subject to death because of sin, the Spirit gives life because of righteousness. And if the Spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead is living in you, he who raised Christ from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies because of his Spirit who lives in you. Therefore, brothers and sisters, we have an obligation, but it is not to the sinful passions to live according to the sinful passions. For if you live according to the sinful passions, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the misdeeds of the body, you will live. Okay? Up or down? I got a lot of ups, I've got some downs, and a couple sideways. Lots of ups. So if you have an up, this is a lot of people would have put up on this. And this is a place where, I forget your name.
Me,
Yeah. Scott, your question, it might be that some of this is sinful passion, some is something else. But this is normally how people, often, how people interpret this passage. Because they see flesh as like your sinful nature or your sinful passions or your fallen nature or something like that, okay? So if you had your thumbs up, you're in good company. But we're still going through all the options before we draw our final conclusions. Yeah.
It's pretty helpful to use the text because it seems like verse 10 is almost referring to sinful passions without using other, making it seem that it might
So I'm reading the whole text because it is helpful to read it in the text. That's why we're doing this 6 times.
Yeah.
So it is, and hopefully the repetition of this is landing some additional insight in you, not just exercising my voice, but it is the context that has to determine which is the appropriate one. So we've got one more possibility, and it's the Jewish people. Okay, so let's read through this version, okay? For what the law was powerless to do, because it was weakened by the Jewish people, God did by sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful Jewish people to be a sin offering. And he condemned sin in the Jewish people, in order that the righteous requirement of the law might be fully met in us, who do not live according to the way of the Jewish people, but according to the Spirit. Those who live according to the Jewish people have their mindset on what the Jewish people desire. But those who live in accordance with the Spirit have their mindset on what the Spirit desires. The mind governed by the Jewish people is death, but the mind governed by the Spirit is life and peace. The mind governed by the Jewish people is hostile to God. It does not submit to God's law, nor can it do so. Those who are in the Jewish people cannot please God. You, however, are not among the Jewish people, but you are in the Spirit, if indeed the Spirit of God lives in you. And if anyone does not have the Spirit of Christ, they do not belong to Christ. But if Christ is in you, then even though your body is subject to death because of sin, the Spirit gives life because of righteousness. And if the Spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead is living in you, he who raised Christ from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies because of his Spirit who lives in you. Therefore, brothers and sisters, we have an obligation, but it is not to the Jewish people to live according to the ways of the Jewish people. For if you live according to the ways of the Jewish people, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the misdeeds of the body, you will live.
Yeah.
So, what's your thoughts? Down, sideways, up, double down, down, sideways, double up. Okay, so now just think, I'm going to go back and just remind you of all of the words, okay? And you're going to pick one. So, again, you might want to go back and there's two in them in place, but let's just assume there's one. What is the predominant one? Physical descent, male sexual organ, all persons, human limitation, sinful passion, Jewish people. Just pause. We've gone through it. I want you to pick one. And we'll do a little vote. So, how many think it has to do with physical descent? Okay. No takers on that one? How many think it has to do with male sexual organ? No takers on that one? How many think it has to do with all persons, just humans? There were some thumbs up earlier on, but no one's taking that now? Okay. Half of your options are gone, so you got to decide between 4, 5, and 6. How many would put it as human limitations? Okay, we have 3 takers on that one. How many would put it as sinful passions? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. Okay? How many would have it on Jewish people? 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm going to put my hand up on that one. Oh. 5. Well, let me unpack this one. Again, this could be more than one in this passage. So it could be that verses 3 through 9 would be the sinful passions piece. It's shortly after 7:28. When we get to verse 13, 12 and 13, which is my big question, So here, the sinful passions verses 3 through 9, it could land there. But this whole issue is Jew-Gentile issue. And the point is, do you have to do the Jewish thing to be saved? Do you have to do the Jewish way? Do you have to get circumcised? Do you have to do those cultural stuff? That's the foundational issue that Paul is addressing. So remind ourselves of that, and I just want you to think about this. The verse 12 says something really important. It says, brothers and sisters, we have an obligation. We have an obligation. And this is where I think I would suggest to you that it fits Jewish people. The Gentiles have an obligation to the Jewish people who spent 2,000 years getting the word of the Lord, having the law and the prophets, and making a way for Messiah to come. But it's not to live the same way the Jewish people live according to their ways. So for me, the determining word there is obligation. I don't know how we have an obligation to our passions. We're trapped in our passions, but why are we obligated to them? Okay? And if you live according to the Jewish way of doing things, their religious practices, the circumcision, the law, and all the other things, you will die. He's talking to the Gentiles here, it's my understanding. So he's contrasting the religiosity of the Judaizers with living with the Spirit. So this is not some abstract theological thing. Again, it's an occasional document, and he's addressing the conflict between Jews and Gentiles. So maybe this passage, maybe those here is the sinful passions. But he then defines it like, what is sinful is if you're relying on your Judaism, on these cultural external things like circumcision of the law. This is going to speak throughout. If you're relying on that, you're not going to be saved. So we have an obligation to the Jews. We owe them something. Now, the reason I think that's really important is this word obligation in Greek is 3 times in the book. So to help me define this passage, which is the right interpretation, I've going to another word. I walked through all 6, and I'm kind of the first part of chapter 8. It could be both ways. I can read it both ways. Let me just finish this, and we can all discuss this. But then the last 3, this last part, I don't see how it applies to, unless it's to the Jewish people because of the context. But he has this word obligation. In chapter 3, he says that in chapter 1, he starts off saying, he is obligated to the Gentiles, Paul. So this is his ministry. God's given him a mandate. He's obligated to them. He's a debtor to them. He owes them something. He owes them the preaching of the gospel. The other 2 times was here and at the end. And I think, so the first time he uses this is about himself and what he owes in order to fulfill the call of God as an apostle to the Gentiles. The other place where this occurs is at the end in chapter 15. So this is, we are debtors. Some of the previous slides were, actually those were NIV. The ASV says we are debtors. But here in 15, as he's wrapping it up, he says, at present, however, I'm going to Jerusalem, bringing aid to the saints. For Macedonia and Achaia have been pleased to make some contribution for the poor among the saints at Jerusalem. For they were pleased to do it, and indeed they owe it to them. So the Gentile churches in Macedonia and Achaia owed a debt of gratitude to the Jewish believers in Jerusalem. And so you say, now, well, it's your turn. For the Gentiles have come to share in their spiritual blessings. They ought also to be a service to them in material blessings. So this is a place he clarifies that Gentiles, though they don't have to live like Jews, they have a debt of gratitude to the Jews. Okay? Where therefore I've completed this and delivered to them what has been collected, I leave for Spain by way of you. So this whole place of his offering, which he mentions 3 or 4 times throughout here, so you'll see it from chapter 12 onward, is because there was a debt for the spiritual blessing that has come through the Jews to the Gentiles. But it comes through them in such a way, not that they have to become Jews. They need to trust God in faith in Jesus and live by the Spirit, not by Judaism. But there needs to be a gratitude for that. And so when I connect all those options and this word and the overall picture, at least verses 12 and 13, I think have to be understood. As Paul just shortly thereafter calls it, says, my fellow Sarks, my brothers and sisters who are Jews, taking to the Gentiles. So there's multiple reasons why it seems that definitely that last part is related to the Jews. So that's where I come out, but you don't have to come out to the same place I do. I could be wrong, and you have the privilege of being wrong too if you want to be. Okay, we don't have to always agree, but I want you to just see the process. So I'm thinking of the big picture. I'm looking at the 6 places where it's clearly different definitions, seeing which ones apply. I just read those in chronological order. And it's interesting that the issue at play in 8 is we have sinful passions in 7, and the next time that we have the word is Jews. So it's right in between those 2 definitions, which just happen to be chronologically, and you can go like, well, this is close to 7, or this is a prelude to what he says about the Jews. The next time he uses the word Sarks. Those are the instances that are there. So it's the last instance and the next instance. So the context gives credence probably most to those 2 views. If you have split, you can do that. If you have just one, I'd lean toward the Jewish thing because that's the main thing, and this passage in chapter 15 cements it for me. So lots of discussion thoughts. Please counter that, suggest that. You've been very patient while I finish talking. Go for it.
Just a quick question. I'm wondering what the readers, like how the readers would have interpreted this section. Like, would they have easily seen 2 different topics of like sinful passions and Jewish people? Or like, would they have likely just used context to come to both of those conclusions? Or would it have to them just been one thing the whole time? I guess, I don't know if that's necessarily
Okay, so that's a great question. Paul clearly had multiple definitions in his mind, right? They are all Greek speakers, so they likely are thinking like Paul. But Paul's more brilliant than many of them, so maybe not everyone got it the first time around. But I think this was a lot easier for them because they're living in the occasion. They get the context. And so I think Paul's thinking this way. I think they could easily have thought that way too. Yeah.
Sorry, my mind's kind of exploding.
I know this is, you've probably never heard this passage as being interpreted as, he's saying basically, you don't have to adopt the Jewish cultural way of living to be a follower of Jesus. You can walk in the Spirit and obey God and remain a Gentile, but be fully a son of God, adopted. And this whole language, we'll do this tomorrow as we read through the rest of chapter 8 of being adopted. They're not natural sons like the Jews, but they are adopted into the family of God. They're added into the family of God. And so this whole passage, when you get this concept, chapter 8, the whole chapter, comes alive in a really dramatic way, which we'll look at on Thursday a little bit more.
Yeah, which I think is what's happening a little bit in my brain. I just wonder the question, is he using all of them as an illusion? Because Roman culture was so bent towards idol worship and sexual worship, and Jews were so bent on the fact that because they were circumcised, they were superior. So it's that whole contrast.
I'm sure there's a play on words.
Yeah, for sure.
Because they were concerned about the little physical flesh of the foreskin, right?
Yeah.
And so, but he's connecting the dots and using language to help identify with some and break out of that concept for others.
It just
he is brilliant.
Totally. It just brought up as I was sitting here. I just heard like the story of Dinah.
The story of
Dinah.
uh-huh.
How she was raped, she was desired. The solution was circumcise everybody, and it led to their slaughter. Just like as we went through it, layer by layer by layer of each definition. It was kind of an interesting picture that popped in my mind of that story, and just obviously Paul knew the Old Testament by heart, so the original Testament. So it's just one of those stories. I was like, man, it's so crazy. Again, what the Jews were called to do, what they were under obligation to lead all nations to Him, and
So
they made it about circumcision.
So what you said when you asked if he was like a metaphor, an illusion, I think was the word you said. He's trying to help people understand that salvation is an internal reality. Okay, it's not an outward actions. That's the whole issue. That's what being in the spirit. And so the Judaizers, the circumcision party, okay, that he had to confront in Jerusalem in Genesis, in Acts chapter 15, they were concerned about the external appearances. You had to fulfill these outward things. So again, as we go through it tomorrow and fill in the chapters 3, 4, 5, and 6, we'll see how this all leads up to this. He's basically saying, you're free to be who you are if you have faith in Jesus. That's sufficient. As Gentiles, you can be a Gentile who walks in holiness and is part of the family of God. If you're Jew, you can walk in holiness and be transformed, not because you're a physical descendant of Abraham, but because you've now walked in the faith of Abraham. And so he levels the playing field for both and affirms both of them in their unique identities. It's absolutely extraordinary what he does. And the reason I think this is so important for us in YWAM to get, because we are always working cross-culturally. And this is a really important. You don't have to follow Jesus the same way I follow in all of our practices or rituals or traditions, whatever they are. YWAM or Anglican or Methodist or Catholic or Baptist or Pentecostal or Charismatic or whatever. You can follow Jesus in a way that is true to your culture, and you don't have to become me. You can be you and be a son or daughter of the living God. And that is, when we get this, that he's addressing the culture, because friends, as you go around the world, in your own life and the life of others, you will often discover there's a huge idolatry of culture. We don't realize how much we idolatrize our own culture until we get into others. And we can immediately see how other people idolatrize their own culture. And the traditions that we just hold on to, and he's going like, those, I think this is what he's saying, is that those things can be done away with. It's faith in Jesus alone. Yeah.
So I was wondering if we could even change the definition a little bit. So I agree with the Jewish people. Would we be also able to say just Judaism in whole? Not just Jewish people, because it would fit a lot better in certain situations. Like, however, you are not in the flesh, or you are not in Judaism, but you are in the spirit. So then it like goes into just the culture of that. So you don't have.
Yeah, you could say Jewish people, Jewish culture, Judaism, or just Jewishness. He's addressing the Greek Gentile Jew issue. So whatever is appropriate. We do know ESV and basically every other translation in 11:3 translated as Sarks as Jews. I mean, there's really no other way to do that. So that's a legitimate, and he just says Jews, so he could just say Jews instead of Jewish people. I amplified it a little bit. So adjust it, you can tweak it. This is, again, the process I hope you see the deliberateness of just trying to think it through observationally. You can go to your pastor's sermon and quote it, or you can go to a dictionary and impose a definition on a given passage, but there's a discovery process that we should go through. And so, let me repeat what I did. I found out what the word was in Greek, I collected all the instances, I started going through them one by one. We didn't do all of them, but we did sufficient. We just left a few of them out to get the variety of meanings. Then we started applying which ones would look. It seemed like the first 4 were clearly not there. The last 2 were significant, and it could be that both of them are used or just one, okay? But the sinful passions was just the last time of Sarx before this series in chapter 8, and the next time Sarx is used means Jew. So it could either, it's a bridge passage between sinful passions and Judaism, okay? So that's where we're at, and then this who really understand this, what does it mean to be, we are indebted to, we are obligated to? And then this connection at chapter 15 goes like, aha, and that's what gives me the tipping point over to, he's talking about the Jewishness. That we all have a debt of gratitude. If they had not gone through all the sufferings for the 2,000 years from Abraham to Jesus, we would not have the gospel in the way we have it today. So as a Gentile, I appreciate Jews, okay? But that doesn't mean I'm going to have to become a Jew. I don't have to practice Sabbath and kosher laws, and I don't have to get circumcised or do all these other rituals. That's what I think it means. So there's several more hands up, so we'll do the order here and then there.
Yeah, so I have a question kind of in regards to how it would have been interpreted, this section, kind of in relation to a different section in chapter 4, where Paul, in all of his great teaching, is relating back to Abraham and like how his righteousness came before his circumcision. And I'm just wondering, this might be a silly question, but how did the Jewish people get from a place of like, they know the law, they've read all these stories of their history, and it's become a thing of their circumcision is their salvation and their sanctification, rather than when it says in the law, Paul's righteousness came before circumcision.
Brilliant question. Can we take that up on Thursday when I'm going through that passage?
That'd be so great.
But again, remember I started off today saying Paul had this conviction as a Pharisee. He was number 2 among the Pharisees, seemingly, the star student of Gamaliel, the head of the Pharisees in the Sanhedrin. And he changes radically. I mean, he's willing to imprison and kill fellow Jews who deviate from core Judaism. And now he becomes like an apostle to the Gentiles, as there's an encounter with Jesus, and you don't have to do anything Jewish at all to be saved. But thanks be to God for the Jews, because through them the Messiah came. That's basically his posture. So what made that huge shift? He looked at the scripture. So he's wrestling with God. We know he spent 3 years in Arabia, which means just a little bit east of Damascus, okay? There's not a lot out there. It's just desert after that. It's just on the other side of the frontiers of the Roman Empire. And he's seeking the Lord. And he's going like, oh my God. God makes a covenant with Abraham before he gets circumcised. The circumcision comes afterwards. And he said, I've never thought of that. He was already made right with God before he got circumcised. Circumcision was not the thing that made him right with God. So that's what he's unpacking in chapter 4. But he must have had this serendipitous, you know, sometimes you've read a passage multiple times, and then you read it on the 19th time and you go, I've never seen it before, right? So he must have one of those. And it's just extraordinary. Okay, so we had several more comments. I was going to do 3 things, but I guess we're going to just do this one thing. I did do the hymn on the Sarks as well. So
I have a question about teaching a difficult passage. So what you just taught us is very helpful for me to now learn how to teach things accurately. But say I didn't understand that it could be Jewish people up till now, and I've taught maybe multiple people that it's
flesh meaning sinful desires when that's actually not what he was trying to communicate, and I lead people to an application that has only to do with sinful desires, is that now wrong, or is there like room for error, or like how? Yeah, I don't know if that makes sense.
So Mariah, remember, we in the list of exhortations in chapter 9, it talked about walking with humility and honoring others. We have all done that. I can think of so many things when I was in my 20s or 30s or 40s that I taught. They go, oh my God, have mercy on the people who listen to me. And I'm sure there's some things now at my stage that I'll learn in the next decades, okay? So we're all growing. So we just have to walk in humility and go like, it's better to just acknowledge, I messed up. Going back and talk with people if you can, but God is bigger than us. And He can bring that adjustment through you, but He can do it through others as well. But I think it just puts a bit of the fear of the Lord in all of us to not be so absolutist in our convictions. Because it requires a little more digging a little deeper. That's the privilege, as I began talking this morning, the privilege of having these 9 months of sitting in the Word and just going a little bit deeper. And there'll be a lot of growth during this time. And you won't have all truth by the end of this time, but there'll be things that you've believed in that will be strengthened, and other things that you believed in that will be corrected. And that's all part of the process. And as you remain teachable and walk in humility, God will continue to work in you and through you. So your question is delightful. When we close, I'm going to pray for me and for you and for all of us for the Lord's grace to be upon us for things that we have told others that may not be as accurate to the scriptures as we'd like them to be. But thank you for your humility.
I just wanted to comment, like, when we read through the version with the sinful passions, it like all made sense, but as soon as it switched to the Jewish people, it became offensive. But then, in light of that, it just reminds me of the way he speaks to in the letter to the Galatians, because he says let them be accursed, and who's bewitching you, returning to those ways. But then it also brings.
Remember, that's the only other place where he used the word curse, and that was our little keystone in our chiasm, if that is a chiasm. Okay, so connect the dots there with. Because there was the same issue there, right, in Galatians and here. So there might be something there to add to our understanding.
Yeah, and then it was also just making me appreciate the beauty of when he says I wish myself accursed for the Jewish people, because he's condemning their holding on to their Jewish traditions, but he's still got such a love for the Jewish people. So he's not just being one-sided, and he's very extreme on that side, but then he's also very extreme on the other side. And so much beauty in that.
So he's not anti-Jewish. Mm-hmm. He appreciates. He boasts in his, I'm of this tribe of Benjamin, and I'm a Pharisee, son of Pharisee. So there's value in that. But also in Philippians 6, he says, all of these things I count but loss for the surpassing knowledge of one in Christ Jesus, him crucified. And so he doesn't. He values Jews, but he does not endorse imposition of Jewish practices on non-Jews.
Would you say, as I was reading this in just the beginning of 12 again, it says, so then, brothers, would that be a pretty good transitional piece of literature to switch from the flesh to the Jewish people?
I think so. I've made all of these points. This is a conclusion. And I think this is a really interesting thing, because he's been speaking predominantly towards Jewish people up to this point. And someplace in chapter 8, maybe it's right here at this point, he transitions and speaks into the Jewish people in third person. All right, so he's now talking to the Gentiles. And if he's doing that, this is one of the amazing things about this passage. And he says, so then brothers, we, the we there is he and Gentile believers. And he's calling Gentile believers brothers. Early on he called Jewish believers brothers.
Yeah.
So he identifies with both of them, but to have a Jew call a Gentile a brother, because, see again the context, this is adding the pronouns here, and what we looked at already there, this passage is a place where it shifts the focus, and it affirms the beauty of Jewishness, the richness of Jewishness, but the unnecessity, I don't know how to say that, but you don't need to become Jew to be an heir of God. You need to move in the Spirit. So that transition is beautiful. I'm glad you pointed that out. I was going to leave that for tomorrow, but it's good to have it today. So you can be thinking about it over the next few days. Wow. Yeah, Sheldon.
It might be completely something off track, but I was wondering about the birth of the Roman Church. Can you speak on that a little bit, like the dating?
You want the famous BRI stuff? You can read the intro in the book in the Bible, in the source view. Everything I say would be there. But you need to just talk with Riley if that's legit, and highly understand how to do that. Obviously, Paul writes. There are a couple letters that he writes that places where he's not been. He was probably never in Colossae, and he was. He had never, for sure, was never in Rome. So he's hoping to get to Rome. Chapter 1, chapter 15, chapter 16 all make that abundantly clear. So the church would not begin. So how did the church begin? Well, if you go back to Acts chapter 2, it mentions all the people that were gathered, and the 3,000 that were saved that day. There were Jews from all the rings, and it mentions Italy as one of the provinces. So it's likely that there are some early Christians at Pentecost who had come from Italy for that celebration, heard the preaching of Peter, got saved, and went back to Rome, and that was the beginning. Okay? Point 1. Another thing is point 2, is we have another point of beginning, is that we know when James is killed, and what's that? That's Acts chapter 11. Yeah, it's the end of the Cornelius passage. I think it's chapter 11, end of 10, beginning of 11. It says that, remember they're praying for him, and he's in jail, and angels open the door, and he comes out, and he knocks on the door, and Rhoda opens, and then slams it, because he goes back and tells him, because she can't believe it's there, and they said, no, it can't be him. They're praying for him to be released, but when he shows up at the door, no one believes it can be him. I just love the honesty of the scriptures. Like, they were praying, but they couldn't believe that God was really answering their prayers. And so he spent some time with them, and then it says he left for another place. It's never detailed, but we don't hear about Peter anymore in the book of Acts. And it's usually thought that where the other place that he went was Rome. So this is not in the New Testament text, but it is in the patristics. Those are the disciples of the disciples, and their disciples. So the first Christians of the end of the first and the second century, who wrote, and they speak about Peter being the one who went to Rome first. And so there is good evidence of that. Mark Mark's gospel is really the gospel according to Peter, as told by Mark. So Mark was a linguist. He spoke multiple languages. You can see this in the Gospel of Mark. He includes in the Greek he has Aramaic words and Hebrew words and Latin words. And so he's a translator. This is noted again by the patristics. 5, 6 of them all write about Mark as being Peter's helper, being Peter's translator, being with Peter in Rome. And so when Paul writes to Mark, remember Paul dismissed John Mark halfway, would not have him go on the second missionary journey. But later in life there's a reconciliation and he wants John Mark with him. But there's good, reliable church history, very just a few decades away from the New Testament era, that Peter and Mark went to Rome together. Peter didn't speak Latin. And his Greek is very poor, so the Greek in his 2 letters is the simplest Greek in the New Testament. So it's just basic Greek, and but Mark was translated for him. So he translated his stories for him. And when Peter was killed in the Roman persecution, the church asked Mark to write down what Peter's words. That's the gospel. So that's abundantly available in BRIs in Mark. I'm doing the BRIs from other books, okay, that you've already done. You've done Mark already? Yeah. So that's very clear. And so where am I going with that? So the first wave would have been from Pentecost, then Peter and Mark. This is why the Pope who passed away yesterday is called the Bishop of Rome, and they trace it all the way back to Peter. But Peter was the first Bishop of Rome, and that's a reliable history. Okay, so. But then you would also have maybe a third wave with Priscilla and Aquila, who after Claudius, when Claudius died in the early 50s, and they've been discipled by Paul, they go back. So they meet Paul in Corinth, and they're in Ephesus, and after some time they go back. And in the list of chapter 16, which we'll get to on Friday, they're the first ones that he greets. So they've gone back and planted churches. And these are Jews. So I think in Rome, some of those households are Gentile churches led by Gentiles. Some are Jewish churches led by Jews. And Priscilla and Aquila would have been a Gentile mixed church led by a Jewish couple that were championing Gentiles. So they're the first ones that get greeted. So probably a Pentecost, a Peter, and a Priscilla and Aquila, at least 3 waves that we know of the church getting there. So those would have happened at, that's a 20-year span. Okay. It is time. I didn't get through as much as I wanted to, but I hope this was interesting to just go through the kind of the plotting process of hitting that same passage over and over again 6 times. And I hope it just goes deep into your spirit. But if it's okay with you, I'd like to pray for all of us that we just stay really teachable before the Lord, and that He'd have mercy on us when we've believed and said things that we ought not to have done, and mercy on the people who've heard us. And so thank you so much for your comments. Lord, we thank you for your word, and we just say we delight in it. It's just an exceptional treasure. There's so much still to discover. I pray for each of my sisters and each of my brothers that there's be increased hunger, a hunger for you, a hunger to understand your character and your ways, a hunger to know your word, and to be able to explain or articulate the heart behind your word with great clarity, with great conviction, but Lord, always remaining teachable and humble as we go forward. None of us here declare that we have a corner of the market of truth. And today I have this conviction of how maybe these two things apply in chapter 8, particularly the Jewish thing at the end. But I just want my brothers and sisters to know that they have the right and privilege to come to that conclusion or some different conclusion of their own. We wrote about the chiasm. I put a question mark there.